All right.
Turning on my clock. Okay. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Question and Answer with Mr. David Sobel. Thank you, David, for joining us today.
Hi, Blair. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing really well. Really well. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, again. We're at the Michigan Real Estate Investor Network, #the network. You guys can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and you can also visit us at our website, michiganreinetwork.com. So my name is Blair Clark, and again, I am here with the attorney David Sobel, and we're going to be asking David a few questions tonight. Each week, people write into David daily, basically asking all sorts of real estate questions, just general real estate questions, and we get our answers from the genius himself. So thank you so much for providing your knowledge.
I don't think I earned that moniker, but that nickname. But thank you.
No, yes,
trying to be so humble.
For sure. Well, I always selfishly start off with my own questions, and so I've been talking to David for the last couple of weeks about a seller financing deal that I'm purchasing through Land Contract, and it's been a roller coaster of a ride, just like any real estate investing. Anything that you do is in the deal, out of the deal, back in the deal, and now we actually have the closing date scheduled, so I am happy about that. We're moving forward with it. And so what I wanted to ask David tonight are two questions. One is hypothetical, and maybe it'll happen or not, and then the other one is definitely very relevant. And so I'll start with the hypothetical question. So my husband and I were purchasing this property on a land contract, and we are going to rent the property out. It's just a single family home. And we are just going to rent it to just average Joe tenant, but I was just thinking in the back of my mind, if someone were to approach me and they wanted to buy the property and they couldn't just outright buy the property on a mortgage or a cash sale, how could I get creative with allowing that person to buy the property? And now I know that I can't land contract on top of a land contract, but I was wondering, what about a lease option to buy? Would us putting that in place, would that trigger that little tricky due on sale clause?
Wow, that is creative, right? It's a really good question, Blair.
Thank you.
I don't know. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll Google it.
You're right. No, hold on one second. No, you know what? It's interesting. First of all, the difference between somebody who's going to do an option and somebody who's buying a land contract is a land contract purchaser actually has a vested legal interest in the property. The courts recognize they have a legal interest in their property. It's really not titled in their name, but they have an equitable interest in the property. So that's much greater than, let's say, having a tenancy, okay? It's one step above, but you're not actually the owner yet of the property. The deed's still with the seller of the land contract. Okay. So basically, land contract is an installment sales contract on property. That's pretty much what it is. So what you have to do is very creative, what you're trying to accomplish or thinking of accomplishing. The first thing is you have to, of course, read your land contract, and there may not be per se a quote due on sale clause in there, but you do have to have permission. Most land contract buyers must have permission from a land contract seller if they're going to alienate, which means if they're going to give away or sell their interest, right? Because the land contract seller doesn't want to have to deal with your tenant who might exercise the lease. So there's always going to be that permission requirement. That's number one. Number two, because of the nature of the transaction where you don't technically own the property as a land contract buyer, there's some like it's like a tentative ownership. Like if you don't perform on the land contract, you could lose your interest. And the person who's renting with that lease option, they could risk losing their interest because their interest flows through you as the buyer on the land contract, if you're following me.
No, I am. So the person that would be purchasing, per se, on the lease option, they put a lot of trust in and control in my hands, which is, I'm a very trustworthy person, but I'm just saying, you know what I mean? I don't know if I would want to do that type of agreement with someone else, regardless.
Right. There are a lot of people who actually, I mean, there's articles in the paper I can go back to. I won't talk about the notorious realtor on the east side, but he was very creative. He had all these different ways of selling properties and financing properties. And you'd be shocked at how many people are, it's not that they're trusting, it's just that they live on hopium. I hate to call it hopium.
Sure.
They hope that it's going to be okay. And in real estate, especially, first of all, it's bad enough. The real estate contracts and the arrangements that people make, especially when they're creative contracts, those transactions, they're hard to follow. And if you're not getting an attorney to review it, don't have a realtor review it, with all due respect to good realtors, but you have an attorney review the documentation. The issue is not to live on hopium. So when your question, your proposed transaction, actually the person I'd be most concerned about is really not the land contract seller, because they have the best position. If they found, let's say in your provisions, that you did a lease option with somebody else and you didn't give them permission, pardon me, they didn't give you permission to do that, well, they're within their rights to call the transaction in breach. They could call your land contract due, per se. Okay, it's not a due on sale clause, by the way, but they could hold you in breach of the land contract, and they could sue you for it. Okay, and they could try and get rid of your land contract. So it's the end user at the very end, your tenant, who's giving you money to reserve that lease option, right? That option, you're taking money from them. Now, they have a vested interest in that property too. A lot of courts will say that tenant is more than just a tenant.
Right, at that point.
Property interest. And you have liability to that person, so you must disclose. Everybody's got to disclose that tenant should actually get something in writing from you and from the seller of the land contract that, hey, we're aware that you're doing this. And then they do that. They have faith in you that you're going to perform under the terms of the land contract. Because if you don't, they could lose their interest. The practical nature of this is that your seller could, let's say you breached it, he could turn over and go right to the tenant and say, hey, they breached it, but I'm happy to work with you on whatever it is that you
just cut me right out.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
You have to be careful about all those things. There's a lot of good people out there, and there's a lot of scrupulous people out there, and I deal with both. I prefer dealing with the people who are good people who are entering into these agreements. Usually I'm cleaning up after messes when we're dealing with unscrupulous people.
Right.
There's a difference.
Right.
Did that answer your question? That's not the easiest answer. I just want you to know that.
Oh, and they never are. They're never just cut and dry, yes and no, black and white. But